What's going on, everybody? My name is Jordan Chan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about NBA Showdown DFS strategy. I think this is a pretty fun and underrated game type. You don't hear a lot as much about NBA Showdown compared to something like NFL Showdown. Obviously, a lot of excitement about the NBA Classic slates, but you just don't hear a lot about Showdown. The prize pools are generally pretty strong. The contest options out there for most of the games on any given slate are pretty good. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit of strategy. Now, before we jump into building lineups, I want to talk about what I like about NBA Showdown and maybe why or why not you may be a good candidate to play these contests or to start adding them to your normal rotation. The first is that late swap obviously isn't going to be a factor in NBA Showdown. Now, I've mentioned before in our NBA DFS strategy videos focused on classic slates that late swap is the most important part of NBA DFS. Staying up to date with the news, seeing the starting lineups coming out, rebuilding your lineups each time games are starting is pretty much the most important thing you can be doing in NBA DFS. But that's time consuming. Not everybody has time for that period, and a lot of people don't have time for that every night. So NBA Showdown can be a great game type to still have a little bit of action in daily fantasy basketball, but instead of having to track it for the entire night for every single game on the slate, you're just picking the handful of games where maybe you know you're going to be available to react to those starting lineups and build your lineups when the starting lineups come out. So if you can't late swap or don't have time to late swap on a given slate, you shouldn't be playing NBA Classic slates, but the NBA Showdown slates can be a great way to get some action down. Now, another good reason to start playing showdowns, and this really goes for any sport, this isn't just NBA specific, this is a contest selection reason here. If your bankroll is large enough where you are maxing out most of the best GPPs under $3 on FanDuel or DraftKings, entering showdowns after that instead of getting more action down on the main slate may allow you to play in softer contests than jumping up in stakes on the main slate. The main reason why is both DraftKings and FanDuel have restrictions about what types of players can enter contests under $3 in their lobby. Once players reach a certain threshold of entry fees or winnings, they can't play in those low stakes contests anymore. So those contests in general are a little bit softer and easier to beat. Once your bankroll grows to a certain level and you want to keep playing 2 to 5% of it per slate, well, eventually you're going to have to jump above that threshold and jump in with the Sharks and start playing against tougher competition. Instead of doing that for main slates, branching out and starting to play some showdowns and getting a little bit more of your action down in those contests will let you stay under that $3 threshold, keep competing against the softer opponents in the lobby, and probably give yourself a higher ROI overall in your NBA portfolio for that given night. And finally, the last reason to think about playing showdowns is because they can reduce your variance. Now, the exception here is if you are just playing showdowns and playing much more of your volume. If you were playing 3% of your bankroll on main slates and you just start playing 1% additional in every single showdown, well, you're probably going to increase your variance because you're exposing more of your bankroll to that slate as a whole. But if you take what you were going to play on the main slate and spread it out, some into the main slate, but some into showdowns, you can actually reduce the variance to your bankroll on that particular slate, because while these slates are going to be correlated, for example, the main slate to the Warriors-Denver showdown tonight, those slates are correlated because this game is on both slates, so your results in one will be somewhat correlated to the other. They're not perfectly correlated, right? The easier way to think about this is, let's say on the main slate tonight, for example, you're using projections or you take a particular angle on the slate and you're just very wrong about the Celtics-Sixers game. Maybe you completely faded it and that game goes to double overtime. Well, that might just sink you for the main slate, right? You might just be dead on the main slate. But that doesn't affect individual showdowns. That doesn't affect the Warriors-Denver showdown here at all, because obviously that game's not on the slate. Another way of thinking about this is if you're just very right on a stand for the Warriors and the Nuggets, maybe you think a role player off the bench is going to get increased minutes and you're right about that, well, that player has to basically be the best possible player you could have used in that positional spot, period, for you to really get paid on that take on the main slate. That can be hard on a 14-game slate, right? You kind of have to get everything right to take down a large field GPP. Well, you can get paid off for your stands in a little bit more of a direct way on individual showdowns. So it gives you a way to realize more of your ROI when you are generally right rather than being perfectly right. So this is kind of a little bit more of a complicated one here, but in general, if you want to smooth out your variance and give yourself a little bit more shots on goal on a given slate, showdowns can be a good way to spread out what you might have otherwise just been playing on just the main slate into other slates like showdowns. And I do want to be clear that I am not saying if you're playing 3% of your bankroll on the main slate every night to just also start playing that in every single showdown or just start adding more. This would be something where you would take what you were already playing on the main slate and maybe spread out a little bit more to other slates to reduce some of that variance. But let's actually get into building some lineups here, talk a little bit about process, and really talk about why SaberSim is so uniquely equipped to just crush NBA Showdown. So I've mentioned before in some of our other NFL Showdown videos, when we think about what is our goal for this contest, what are we trying to do with our lineups? In general, for most Showdown contests, you are trying to build the optimal lineup. You are trying to build the highest possible scoring lineup that you can for a given way that the game could play out. That is a little bit different than classic slates. You're trying to beat all of your opponent's lineups. You're trying to outscore the other opponents in your contest. But for most Showdown contests, basketball included, you are actually trying to build the best possible lineup for a given way that the game might play out. And more specifically, you're trying to build a portfolio of lineups that are all optimals for given ways that the game could play out. Now, that is challenging to do with average projections, right? Average projections don't necessarily speak to what happens when a game has an outlier outcome, right? It's difficult to know based on average projections what the optimal lineups look like in different game scripts for NBA. That's exactly what SaberSim does. So when you're building lineups on SaberSim, we're not just using the average projections. We're taking the full game, play-by-play game simulations we have for this game, thousands of them, and each lineup you build on SaberSim is the optimal lineup for a single game simulation of the way that the game could play out. We're going to give you a pool of 2,000 to 5,000 of those different lineups to ultimately mess around with, to rank and sort, to see which ones you ultimately want to take with you into your contest. And you may have heard some of this before, but why this is uniquely valuable for NBA is because that news breaks so late, right? Most of the time, we're going to get starting lineups for these games 10 or 15 minutes before that the game is supposed to start. And if you were trying to build these lineups with a traditional optimizer or by hand, you have to react to that news, process it or wait for your source to update, and then figure out how to come up with the new possible game scripts for that particular news that just came out or the new starting lineups, and then rebuild the optimal lineups. Well, that is the part that SaberSim is going to basically completely automate for you. Once we get the starting lineups for these games, we're going to run a new set of tens of thousands of simulations of the game. It takes just a couple minutes, and then give you a new pool of 2,000 to 5,000 lineups here that you can work with in your pool to select what you want to play. But all of those are optimal lineups. All of those are viable lineups for a given Showdown contest. All of that leads to it being very easy to use a lean and simplified process using SaberSim to build your NBA Showdown lineups. I don't want to give off the impression that these game types are easy or that this is something where you can just do for a couple slates and just guarantee that you're going to make a profit. You're still trying to pick the optimal lineup of a basketball game and beat out 5,000 to 10,000 other lineups of opponents trying to do the same thing. But I do think you can have a pretty lean and efficient and profitable NBA Showdown process over the long term following this, because SaberSim just makes it so easy to find these viable lineups. So let's go ahead and build some lineups here. All I'm going to do is make the 2 changes I have to for the DraftKings requirements here. I'm going to otherwise leave this on default settings here, and I'm going to just build lineups. And again, what SaberSim's doing here behind the scenes is it's going into our database of our simulations for this game, and it's building the optimal lineup that comes out of a given game script from our simulations and doing that 2,000 times. We'll be left with a set of 2,000 optimal lineups that we can rank and sort and decide which ones we want to take with us into our contest, but each of these is the optimal for a given game script. Each of these is a viable lineup on its own. Okay, so now we've got our 2,000 optimal lineups here, and we are sorting the best 20 out of them from the top using SaberScore. SaberScore is going to be a great way to rank and sort these lineups here. It's taking into account how often a lineup is optimal in the simulations, how many times was that the optimal lineup in a sim, the projection, and then negatively weighting the ownership of the lineup to get us a little bit more unique to bring down those dupes a little bit here. So SaberScore does a great job. But if you want to take this to the next level, and this is where I think I personally get very excited about NBA Showdown, because I think this is just an enormous edge that is available here, is with the contest sims, using the SaberSim contest sims. So what the contest sims are going to do instead is it's going to take each lineup you have in your pool, and it is going to play it in the contest that you have, in a simulated version of the contest that you're planning on playing 100,000 times each. So it's comparing this lineup based on the 11,000 lineups or so that we expect to be played into the fadeaway here for tonight, for example, and see how that lineup performs using what if the game plays out this way? What if the game plays out this way? What if the game plays out this way 100,000 times? And then ultimately calculating the ROI for those lineups. Now, this is how contest sims always work, right? This is really always exactly how the contest sims work. But for NBA Showdown in particular, because of the typical sizes of those contests, our contest sims are going to start to get very accurate, very sharp. The main reason why is because most of the contests in the lobby for these particular contests are 10,000-ish lineups or less. Now, at the moment, SaberSim's fields, the field lineups that we use to mimic the field that you're going to play in your contests, are capped at 10,000 lineups. We only have 10,000 lineups in our fields. So what that means is if you're playing a contest that has 50,000 lineups in it, we are basically paring that contest down and scaling it to a 10,000 lineup version of that contest and simulating your lineups against that. Now, that generally is going to do a pretty good job of approximating a contest. But for Showdown, there is a issue with that, or there is a potential problem where duplication ends up becoming such a big issue, right? You need to know how many times a lineup is going to be duplicated to properly get a sense of how much that lineup wins when it actually takes first. Duplication doesn't really scale linearly. And what I mean by that is if a lineup is expected to be duped 5 times in a contest where there is 10,000 entrants in it, it doesn't necessarily mean that lineup is going to be duped 50 times in a contest where there are 100,000 entrants in it. The relationship between how dupes scale as a contest gets bigger is a little bit more complicated than just being a linear percentage-based relationship. So as a contest gets further and further away from 10,000 field lineups in it, it gets a little bit harder to accurately know if you are correctly accounting for how many other people are going to play that lineup. So that brings me back now to NBA Showdown in particular. Because most of the contests in the NBA Showdown lobby are going to be 10,000 or less lineups here, you're in a situation where our field lineups suddenly become a very accurate measure of about how many times a lineup is going to be duplicated. Probably the hardest part about Showdown in any sport is weighing the balance between duplication and likelihood of that lineup being the optimal. How many dupes are okay for a given lineup that has a certain probability of coming in first place? Should you strive to be completely unique? How unique do you need to get for different lineups? And that problem gets a little bit even harder for NBA because since average projections are generally more representative of ceiling performance for players, it's harder to find those low-owned plays that nobody's going to get to, right? The low-owned plays in NBA are guys that are barely going to get off the bench. In NFL, they can catch a touchdown. In MLB, they can hit a home run. In basketball, it's a lot harder for that to happen. So you have to weigh these decisions of how duped am I comfortable getting on a particular slate. So all of this is to say, because the NBA Showdown lobby generally matches up very well with how many lineups we have in our fields, the contest sims are going to do a very accurate job of determining what the highest ROI lineups are in your pool. So all of that to say, what I'm going to do here just to demonstrate this is to we'll take the $1.20 max, a contest that I typically like. This is a 10,000 prize pool contest, pretty good payout structure here for this particular slate. Again, really nice under $3 contest in the lobby most nights. We'll go ahead and save this and then run the contest sim and just see how these lineups grade out. Okay, so the contest sim ran here. Now we can sort by ROI for this particular slate. Now, you might be thinking, should I be using ROI or risk-adjusted ROI here for this particular slate? Either's probably fine. They're both pretty heavily correlated. When I think about Showdown in general, most of the time, I'm less concerned about mitigating risk in my Showdown contests, and I just want the most profitable lineups possible. You can use it risk-adjusted ROI. It's not going to make an enormous difference to your portfolio here. Either one of those is fine. But let's take a look at this here now and kind of talk about what we're seeing. So we're getting the expected ROI of these lineups now played into this contest. And you can see this dupes measurement here, right? This dupes calculation here, again, because this contest is very close to the size of the field we're using to simulate it, is going to become a pretty good approximation of expected number of dupes for these given lineups. Now, it's not perfect. No model is perfect. In fact, the more people, if you ended up playing in a contest full of just SaberSim users all doing this exact process, this dupe calculation would all of a sudden not be as good. But we are taking an aggregated, industry aggregated projection building lineups for this slate, trying to mimic the field, and it's going to approximate those dupes pretty well here. And what you can see is that it's going to make that balance between a lineup's profitability versus how often it's going to be duped here. So if we look at this lineup, right, these lineups have very similar ROIs. They have a totally different dupe calculation here, right? And you can see just looking at these lineups here where that's coming from. So this lineup is going to be expected to be duped 7 times. It wins the contest about 1% of the time here, and it has a cash rate of 72.1. So a lot of this lineup's equity isn't coming from the fact that it's going to, I mean, it is going to win sometimes, right? But it's going to be expected to share that with some other people when it wins. A lot of its ROI comes from the fact that it's cashing very, very often in this contest. If we look at this one instead, it's a lower projection. It actually has a lower win rate. It has a lower cash rate, but we're not expecting any dupes for this particular lineup for the contest. So when it wins, it's going to win the full pot, bumping up that ROI here. You can also see that in the risk-adjusted ROI, right? This lineup's risk-adjusted ROI is a lot higher than this one because this lineup gets a lot of its equity from first place. It carries a lot of additional risk here. So this is what I'm talking about, where contest sims are going to take these complicated decisions that you typically have to intuit out yourself for an NBA Showdown in a very short period of time, typically, right before the game starts when you get the starting lineups, and solve a lot of those problems for you. And that's why I like these game types so much for NBA Showdown. Now, you are not dead on arrival if you are using SaberScore. In fact, using the play-by-play game simulations here that build this pool of lineups where they're all optimals for given game simulations, and then taking the SaberScore, which is basically an approximation of what the contest sims do automatically, is still going to give you a very good edge on the field here compared to what your opponents are doing. And if you look at these, sorting by SaberScore, we're still seeing that in most of the top lineups, they're grading out as profitable with the contest sims. It's just going to be a little noisier. It's not going to be as precise as the contest sims are, but you're still going to be playing profitable lineups. But if you really want to make a jump in your NBA Showdown strategy or your NBA Showdown ROI, I'd recommend signing up for the Ultimate Plan using the contest sims because they are going to work extraordinarily well for these NBA Showdown contests. So from here, what I would generally recommend doing here is running the contest sim, getting the lineups built, sorting by ROI or risk-adjusted ROI if you want to be a little bit more risk-averse there, and you're pretty much done. These are going to be very profitable, high EV content lineups to play into your contest. I'm generally also not very concerned with min uniques here, mostly because I don't want to. The difference between 1 min unique and 2 min uniques in a 6-player lineup where you're trying to find the optimal is just a lot. You are going to start eliminating good lineups very quickly, so I haven't been using min uniques to diversify in NBA Showdown as much. I would say if you want some additional risk management there, you'd probably be better off just using risk-adjusted ROI and letting those top lineups, even if they're one player different, all be entered into your portfolio here. So remember that most of the time you're going to be building these lineups, you're under the gun on time, right? You're not going to have a lot of time between when you get the starting lineup for this game, when you go through this process to do a lot else, especially if you are also balancing late swaps for these games with your main slate lineup. So I don't think you need to say that there has to be a bunch of other stuff that you are doing here to add additional value. I think these lineups are pretty much good to go, and this is basically my NBA Showdown process. Now, with that said, I know there are always folks out there that watch my videos that want to go one step deeper. They follow these steps, but they want to do something that is unique, that makes their process their own, and I get that. What I would recommend looking at in NBA Showdown is situations where all projection models or everyone's assumption is likely to be wrong. And I think where that mostly comes into play in basketball in particular is with injuries or recent starting lineup changes. Now, when a key player has been ruled out for a team, it creates an interesting situation where most of the time the industry ends up crowding around a particular player to soak up a lot of that usage, right? The next guy up is projected to kind of be that next player that's getting those minutes, that's going to step in and be that guy. In reality, though, there is a lot more uncertainty in who that player is. So let me show this with a quick example here. This isn't a perfect example, but recently, at the time I'm recording this video, Jamal Murray got hurt for the Nuggets. So there's already been a game played since Jamal Murray got ruled out. So in the game that he originally got hurt in, he played for 10 minutes. He injured his hamstring, and then Reggie Jackson came in and played most of the remaining minutes of that game. Then we get another game after that where Reggie Jackson again started that game, played most of the minutes there, but Julian Strawther, the Nuggets rookie, ended up coming in, getting some good minutes off the bench, and played a very good game. So we do have a little bit of uncertainty around this game here somewhat tonight. There would have been more uncertainty in the first game after Jamal Murray got ruled out, but we still have some uncertainty in here tonight. And when we look, and if we filter by the Nuggets, we can kind of get a sense of how this game is being projected here. So Reggie Jackson is expected to start, play about 29 minutes here, and then we have this Christian Braun, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson here, even Colin Gillespie here. Like, all these guys are expected to kind of share minutes off the bench here, filling in for the Jamal Murray gap, right? So the projections are a little bit hedged here, right? We're kind of assuming that in this particular situation, this is a little bit spread out for that next guy off the bench, and that Reggie Jackson is at around 29 minutes. There is a lot of uncertainty here of what could actually play out, right? If we look at Julian Strawther and look at his average projection, right, his ranges of outcomes are all going to be around that 15-point projection range, right? So we're saying most of his common outcomes take place in this range. Well, that is dependent on him playing 17 minutes, and that's the same thing for everybody else, right? That is kind of a core assumption here that he's going to play around 17 minutes. Most of these outcomes are centered around that. Well, especially in these situations where there's injury news, there's almost more of a binary option here, where like there is game outcomes that aren't going to be captured in these simulations here, where Julian Strawther has actually become the proper sixth man off the bench for the Nuggets and is going to play 25 minutes. We have some minutes variance baked into our sims, right? So when we simulate a game where we have Julian Strawther projected at 17 minutes, there's going to be games where he plays 13 and there's going to be games where he plays 20, 21. But our sim and just projection models in general aren't really going to properly pick up on the true uncertainty of injury news, of how minutes are going to get split up when a guy that is in the starting lineup gets ruled out and all those minutes and all that usage is vacated. And this is just true. This is in any projection model, we're dealing with a certain amount of unknown information and you have to kind of make some assumptions there. So all of this is to say, what I would do if you want to research or if you want to spend time making adjustments here is focus on uncertain situations due to injury. I can't give you the exact answer to the test because I don't even know it for this Nugget situation here tonight. But looking around and seeing what does SaberSim think is the likely outcome here, and maybe even looking at other models and other projections. What do other tools think is the likely outcome here? You can also use the ownership projections as a bit of a guide, and intentionally fading that angle here can be a useful, fading the most popular angle can be a useful tool because you are on the right side of the uncertainty and the variance of that actual situation. So I can give you an idea of how I might approach this just to make this a little bit more practical if I wanted to make some adjustments for tonight's slate. So we are, again, 2 games removed from Jamal Murray getting hurt. It's very likely that Reggie Jackson is going to start tonight. So he's going to carry there's going to be a little bit of certainty to his minutes and usage. So I find these guys off the bench to be particularly interesting here as a way to get unique. Looking at the ownership projections and looking at the SaberSim simulations saying that these 4 are roughly equal, and also looking at the salaries, I think it is going to be exceedingly popular for people to play Julian Strawther tonight. He just had a great game. He is the cheapest one here. The narrative is pushing him in that direction. Well, we have Christian Braun, who's been around on this team for a little while. We have Mike Malone, who is a coach that doesn't like to play rookies as much here. And we have a big salary and ownership discrepancy here on Christian Braun versus Julian Strawther and even some of these other guys. I think it is an interesting angle to play that Christian Braun gets a little bit more run tonight here. Again, that is not on like I have insider information that other people don't. That is a game theory play that I think my lineups are likely to be a little bit more profitable, or I'm going to get a little more unique. I'm going to get paid off more when Christian Braun is the guy you need tonight than Julian Strawther is another way of looking at that. So the way I might do that is a lot of times it's just a subtle touch here. I might go ahead and maybe give Christian Braun another 3 points, taking a point away from each of these 3 players, right? And what I'm really doing here is it's as if I'm taking a minute away from each of these players and I'm giving Christian Braun 3 additional minutes here. And I'm going to just take a stand on the guy that is a little bit of a higher salary, projected for a little less ownership in a situation that I think is really uncertain here. And then I'm going to rerun this contest sim. And this is going to rerun the contest sim using this new assumption here. If you wanted to go one step further, you could also rebuild your lineups after making these projection changes. That's probably actually the better way of doing this, but for the purposes of time for this video, I'm just going to rerun the contest sim here, and then what we'll do is we'll flip back and look at the new ROI here for our lineup. So let's take a look here. And if we look and we start to see the exposures, well, things have changed a little bit here, right? In our top 20, now we're getting 25% Christian Braun. We're about even with the field on Julian Strother, right? Before, we had 45% Julian Strother. We only had about 5% Christian Braun. So we were kind of in line with the field there on those two particular plays. We weren't using either of them as a leverage opportunity. We were probably getting leverage somewhere else, probably on a guy like Aaron Gordon. It looks like we're going to be really over the field on here for tonight's slate. But now we have a little bit of leverage on an uncertain situation. We're not fading Julian Strother completely. We have 30%. We're matching up with the field. But in the event that Christian Braun does get maybe a little bit more run, or is shooting the ball well, or Malone kind of just goes with the guy in a nationally televised game that he trusts a little bit more this early in the season, we have a little bit more leverage on that particular situation. So again, this is not meant to be a tutorial on how to play the Warriors Nuggets slate from November 8th of 2023. What I'm trying to do is give you some ideas of how you might attack these types of situations in the future. There's a lot of injury news in NBA. There's a lot of guys getting ruled out. There's a lot of showdowns to play. So you can use this as a way to maybe make a small tweak, get a little bit of additional edge in the 5 to 10 minutes that you typically have to do this process in a given NBA Showdown slate. But the most important thing for your success in NBA Showdown should be getting comfortable with the idea of building your lineups, understanding what the sims are doing behind the scenes, running your contest sim, sorting by ROI, and then you can make these kind of subtle game theory type moves on individual players here based on injury news, based on uncertain situations and things like that. So that's it. That is basically my exact NBA Showdown process. I think these game types are a lot of fun. I think they can be a fun way to smooth out your variance, to get a little bit of additional action down, or to just give you something to sweat on a night you're not going to be able to late swap for every single game on the main slate. And SaberSim and the contest sims in particular really can just provide a massive edge here. There's two reasons why, right? One is it's naturally building the optimal lineups for individual game scripts. That's 80% of the work that you have to do typically to even get competitive in these contests. That part's just automated. The contest sims themselves are going to very accurately identify the best possible lineups from your pool to play because they are going to mimic the field so well for these particular games. And if you're using SaberScore, it's going to be a great approximation of the contest sim ROI. It's not going to be as precise or accurate again there, but as we saw here in this video, it's going to approximate ROI pretty well there. So definitely recommend checking these out. If you are watching this video and you're not currently a SaberSim subscriber, you can sign up for a free 5-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com. Come check out the contest sims, come play a little NBA Showdown with us. Really awesome stuff here. And of course, if you have any other questions or there was something I didn't get to or explain clearly in this video, you can always reach out in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. Enjoy NBA Showdown season and good luck.